clearly, and you also see these things, which really annoys me, is that if you go to certain sites like, American Airlines, and then all of a sudden you'll see American Airlines ads all over the place. To me, it doesn't make any sense. I went to American, I finished booking my flight. I'm done with you guys, but why do they spend money? But it does seem to work for some kinds of products, like Zappos will do that. You go to Zappos and you shop and you don't end up buying something, then for the next 2 days you're going to see Zappos ads all over the internet, not just on our site, but a lot of other places are placing ads that way. So there is already a certain amount of that kind of trying to use what is known about, and it's not you that's known about a cookie on your computer, because there might be multiple people on that computer, but it's not that they know who you are. Yes?
When you are doing interviews with incoming journalists, what do you want to be in your portfolio?
I don't know if everyone heard, but when we're interviewing incoming journalists, what are we looking for in their portfolio? It's a little challenging because a lot of times we're looking for a specific area of expertise. A lot of times we're looking for different things. The main thing I ask of people when talking to them is, are you flexible? Are you adaptable? Are you willing to live with the kind of change, which I just outlined? And in some cases I say, whatever job I give you today, it probably will change within 6 months because things keep changing. So I'm looking for flexibility, adaptability, a willingness to jump in and try new things. Obviously still the core strengths of journalism, that you can report well and get accurate information and tell good stories. I just hired a young man who just finished Columbia J School Masters, and before that he was at USC Annenberg. He blew me away with his ideas about what we could be doing with video and social media. It just sort of came out of the blue. It wasn't that we were even looking for somebody, but he kind of approached us, a Louisville native. He was interested in coming back to Louisville. It was just like amazing ideas about what he would do if he could come work for us and blow out some of what we're doing with video. More questions? Yes, Tony?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
This is just something that I was asked the other day when I talked to some manual kids about journalism, and they had asked me a question and I wouldn't know how to answer it. It was about, what is the future of the print product? And we talk a lot about video and online. What is the future of the print product?
Yeah. We would love to see it go as long as possible. There's still a lot of people who read it. We just finished a 2-day planning exercise. We tried to envision that to 2020. What does the world look like in 2020? And I think in that we still had a pretty healthy number of print subscribers, at least at 2020. So it's still a good driver of profits, and it's still a good way to reach a portion of the community that doesn't want to get involved with various digital formats in circulation and readership of print. But I don't think it's going to go so fast that it's not going to be a viable business for quite some time. So it makes a lot of sense for us to keep it going. As far as I know, there's no immediate conversations around changes to how many days a week we publish. You'll see that in a lot of markets where they realize that Sunday is the biggest driver of revenue and income, and a couple other days are profitable. But some days you can pick up the paper on Monday and you can feel it and say, probably not making any money on this paper. So if you kind of break it down day by day and sort of treat each as a separate business, you'd say, let's shut down certain days. To me, that really harms the overall product. People aren't, the ones who are print readers aren't in that daily habit. Once you start cutting out certain days, I think you start to lose that readership habit, and then it just accelerates your decline. So I don't see that as something that's likely to happen. Certainly wasn't in any of the scenarios we were playing with the last 2 days. So.
What is the size of your staff? What's the staff look like now compared to what it would have been, at the beginning of the percentage-wise?
That's been the biggest challenge, is looking, what can we afford given the size of our revenues and everything else. Our newsroom staff is about 80 right now, but it's down from 95, I think, when I got there a year ago. And when I got there, I had a spreadsheet that showed what's happened over the last 5 years, and so that's probably half what it was 5 years ago. What that meant is we have had to really kind of rethink, and part of what we did last June was step back, or we rolled it out in June. It was a result of 6 months of really thinking about, if you project forward, where the trends are going and what can you afford in 2016 based on where the trends seem to be going, what we think. And we stepped back and said, okay, we can afford X size newsroom in terms of dollars. And rather than do what has happened a lot over the years, is to take a few people here, take a little over here, and just kind of cut where you thought you could, we stepped back and reorganized and changed the shape of the newsroom fairly dramatically. And a lot of what we tried to do in that is preserve the resources dedicated to news gathering, content creation, storytelling, and look at ways that we could do with fewer editors and managers and people that support that. And I think that's also part of why, when I rolled that out, I said to folks that if I were creating a news organization today, I'd create a network of bloggers. And I'm not sure everybody got that, because sometimes some people think of bloggers as doing like lower quality work. What I really meant was the kind of bloggers who really, have ownership of a subject area. They own a subject area. They really they know all the sources. They know the contacts. They figure out the right stories to be covering. But more than that, they also own the relationship with their audience. They're interacting with the people who read their blog. They're getting information that way. They're building community around their content. And to me, that's where the journalists, the future needs to be. They need to be thinking that way. They need to have that mindset of, this is my topic, this is my subject, these are the people who read it, and how can I build that audience and build that community around that? And what we as a news organization need to do is support that. Some level of editing to help that, some level of obviously distribution we provide, but a lot of that is to support the journalists who are creating great content.
Was it hard to fire the people you had to fire? Or furlough, or whatever the word?
Yeah, it's the hardest thing I've done. Well, it's hard actually doing it, but what was really hard is coming to some of the decisions that had to be made. So it's not an easy. I did it once back at the Wall Street Journal in 2001, where we went from 200 to 250, or from 250 to 200 in one day, and that's painful. It's probably more painful to do 7 folks locally, because you knew them even more. Let's not end on that down note.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the notion of habit, right? We're talking about print in particular, but habit seems to be the biggest thing, right? We want, just like any other business, we want consumers, we want our customers, whatever, to be in the habit of consuming our product.
Yeah.
How do we build that habit, particularly for that habit for news consumption or information consumption? How do we build that among particularly young people? And also, more specifically, what's the role of media organizations like the Courier-Journal in helping to develop that habit? Because I think in the past, it's been like the thought of, oh, well, you'll reach a certain age, and then, of course, overnight you'll be catching news.
Yeah.
What's the role of the organization in that?
Yeah. I think it's going to be harder to build habit for a news organization in its entirety. I think because part of that was based on we delivered a bundle of all kinds of stuff to your door, or to your TV at 6 o'clock or whatever, and people sat there and kind of consumed the bundle. Now I think there's a lot less loyalty to a single brand for that. But what's replacing that in many cases is loyalty to individual brands within that. So again, back to the analogy of network of bloggers, we want to help build each of the people who work for us up as kind of their own go-to place for certain kinds of information. So we probably won't have people in the habit of going to every one of those people as much as we had in the past. But somebody may really say, I care about the environment. I'm going to follow Jim Bruggers on Twitter or on his on Courier-Journal, and that he's somebody who brings me all the environment information I could possibly ever want. Somebody's going to follow Tony Kahn because she does a great job of covering Jefferson County schools. But she has big competition now. But that's where I think that habit starts to come into play, is that they follow the individual because they have the expertise and they do a great job of serving their community. And that's where I think we can still build habit and maybe move some of that around in our network to other people, other expertise. But I think most of it's going to be kind of people-based. We have people who love, Jeff Greer, who covers U of L sports, and they're going to follow him. And then maybe they'll see something that one of our other folks who dip in and out of U of L sports, like Tim Sullivan or Adam Himmelsbach, has written about U of L because Jeff is calling their attention to, hey, Adam's got a really good piece today on Bohannon, which was a good piece.
What about the role of newspapers or journalism in general in creating sort of societal literacy about the things that are important that we all need to be aware of? If I'm guided just to what I want to see, what about the things I should want to see or should know about?
Right. There has to be some of that in the mix of what we do. Although I would say that there's a lot more interest in that than sometimes we give people the public credit for. So it's not that people all gravitate to X or to entertainment or fluff, because we see that in our metrics a lot. I remember one day where our Frankfurt bureau person went to a lunch and wrote up a short piece on his blog about state revenues. And all of a sudden, it was like the third highest story on our site. It's like, whoa, people are really interested in this. And we weren't even going to run anything in the paper about that. We said, hey, Tom, you got to go back and flesh that story out a little bit more for the paper because people are clearly interested in this. And that's not a subject that is what you'd expect people to be gravitating to. So I think there's a lot of things that we can learn that tell us that people have some interest. So and we'll continue to do some of that. We'll continue to do watchdog work. We'll continue to dig in, investigate things, because I think there is an appetite for that beyond some of these other subject area kind of things.
From a, hey, I can hire you standpoint, so you're saying you just hired someone directly out of grad school?
I did.
So it used to be that you would have to work at least 10 or more years after grad school to get to this size market and work for the Courier-Journal, or am I not being fair about the standards of it? So in other words, you guys in this room could work for Neil Budde out of school, is my point.
I'll tell you one story, which I told the day my appointment was announced to this job. I went to WKU, I graduated, I went and interviewed at the Courier-Journal, this was 1977, and there was an executive editor there who had a policy that says, we won't even look at anybody without 5 years experience. So they said, no luck. So I went to Richmond, Virginia to the Times-Dispatch. I was there about 11 months. I get a call from the editor in Louisville, said, executive editor's gone, policy's gone, we want to hire you. So it can't happen, and because of that, I'm not going to put in place a policy that says we'll only hire people directly with 5 years of experience, because I was a beneficiary, or I was hurt by that, and then a beneficiary of getting rid of that policy. So I'm not a fan of that policy. I'm much more interested in people, what they can do, their ideas, their ability to kind of execute quickly and think differently about how they do their jobs than I am about, boom, 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 do you have X, Y, Z experience. I would say, it's still good to have some internships and experience while you're in school. This particular young man that worked for NBC Nightly News in Burbank for 2 years doing a bunch of stuff. So he had some decent experience even though he was just getting out of school.
Just to sort of jump off of Ralph's question, in a lot of the history of the last 20, 30 years or so in sort of employment trajectory is jumping from market to market. Journalists are no longer or for a long time, we're no longer of a community that they're covering. They're kind of parachuting into a community to cover it. And it seems like what you were kind of mentioning about the personal brand being so important that that it's not the Courier-Journal that's my trusted friend, but that it's a particular reporter who's my trusted friend who will tell me about this thing. Yeah. Are we going to see a shift, do you think, or are we already starting to see a shift where that kind of hopping around to different markets is going to happen less?
going from, the first statement to the second seems to make sense, and I would love to keep the people that we have building those brands, with us, and I think there is a bit more of that loyalty, and there's a lot of value in having done that in a market. We are of a big enough size market that might be easier for us, although we used to, in the day, used to lose people to Philadelphia or the New York Times or Washington Post. But I don't know whether that's going to bleed down to some of the smaller markets where people may start and then are looking to get to somewhere a little bigger. So it's, sometimes there's unintended consequences. I don't know if you can make the leap from you're building your brand locally to you're going to stay there. But it'd be nice, particularly if they're staying with us.
To follow up, actually, do you see yourself in the market for freelancers? And if so, is that labor search easy?
We do use a decent number of freelancers, mostly in photo and video. Not as much for sort of word content, although there's some people who write like a health column or things like that. Not as much dip in for just certain things, although that may rise down the road.
What's that labor search like? Do you just get called for submissions on your website? Do you use a service?
Most of what we do is people who build a reputation with us, and we have kind of in the Rolodex of and particularly on the photo video side, you also know people's strengths or weaknesses. They're good at covering an event, or they're good at covering entertainment, or they're good at covering sports, and they do really good work.
Back to your network of bloggers, if that's your ideal, your utopia, is it that there's just not institutional willingness to go towards a freelancer being able to draw from like a hired guns list, or what's preventing you at the helm from heading in that direction?
Money.
You would think the overhead would be less.
It is, for certain things, so there are places where it makes sense to use a freelancer because it's not a full-time job. You don't necessarily want to tack it onto somebody else's. Dana McMahon, for instance, who covers a lot of restaurant news for us, does it as a freelancer, and I think she does a really nice job of kind of tapping into what's going on, specials and new programs around town, and I think that makes some sense, even though we just added a full-time beat around food and restaurants and what's going on, because we could tell that there's a huge interest in this community around that topic. But that didn't mean it supplanted what Dana was doing as a freelancer, because she can do a certain level of things and free up our full-time person to dive deeper into certain kinds of things.
Thanks.
And I know you're just trying to figure out your business model.
I'm testing lots of ideas. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Thought I saw a hand back here. No? Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I think that if there's one more question, go ahead. And if not, thank you very